Hello and welcome to the CX Files for 28th September 2023. My name is Mark Hillary and I'm in Sao Paulo, Brazil.
And I'm Peter Ryan in Montreal. Mark, great to see you. It is coming to your summertime, and we're entering autumn here in the Great White North, but certainly the CX world and the world of those playing in it, certainly there is no rest for the wicked.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. Well, as I was saying to you just before we came onto the recording, my dog actually had heat exhaustion yesterday when we were out for a walk, and I ended up carrying him home because we really are getting into that summer heat now, even though officially it's only just summer by a few days.
That's it. Well, no. And first of all, commiserations for your pooch and hope that he's doing better. And you showed him a little bit on the screen before we started recording, and he looked like he's made a monster recovery, which is wonderful. But, on this side of the pond, or sorry, in this side of the hemisphere, because we're both on the same side of the pond, even though we forget that sometimes, we're actually entering the 12 to 15 degrees Celsius range, which to me is a sweet spot. Once it starts going below 10, it starts getting a little bit painful. And when we hit January where it's minus 35 or minus 40, well, it's really time to hibernate.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you've been down to Brazil, so you know what it's like here. Once it goes below 20 degrees, then everybody's reaching for hoodies and jackets.
You're right. And I find it interesting, too, just as an aside, Mark, that you're from the UK, I'm from Canada. When I used to go visit you in the United Kingdom when you were living in London, from Montreal to Heathrow was a 5.5 hour flight. To get from here to Sao Paulo is an 11.5 hour flight. Nobody thinks about this stuff when they're living in the same hemisphere, do they?
No. People forget about the north to south divide and how it's pretty much the same time for me to go to New York as to go to London. Even though you think, well, don't you have to cross the Atlantic Ocean as well at the same time?
This is it. This is it. But some big news from a CX angle in that we have announced CX Outsourcers will be taking place in Atlanta, Georgia on May 1 and 2 next year. Opening night cocktail party, the 30th of April. So we encourage everybody to visit cxoutsourcers.com so they can buy a ticket and find out more information. We'll be hosting the event at an amazing venue called Terminus 330. Now, Terminus 330, Mark, is a former actually, you'll be interested in this, or your neighbor Jonas will be interested. It's a former coffee factory. It was a coffee mill, and it has got a great amount of history to it. It's been completely renovated, turned into a very funky industrial chic event space, and we're looking forward to another sellout attendance, of which, of course, you will be participating.
I'm definitely looking forward to being there. I've already been looking at the venue. It looks fantastic. I can bring some fresh Brazilian coffee up there as well, so I can share that out amongst the guests at the event.
Well, fresh Brazilian coffee is always welcome at any event, CXO or otherwise. But interested to find out, Mark, who we are going to be chatting with on the pod today.
Well, we're talking with Terry Rybolt, who's an old friend of both of ours and the pod. He has appeared before in the past. I think it was about 2 years ago, just as we were coming out of the main part of the pandemic. Terry's the Chief Revenue Officer at LiveXchange Technologies, and he's based in Boston. Now, Terry and I have worked on some books over the past few years. Right as the pandemic began in 2020, we actually published a book together called GigCX, which explained, what is GigCX and what's happening, where has it come from. We published another book in 2022 that kind of explored gig workers, how gig workers are sort of transferring into the CX environment. And we've just this week published a third book on gig CX, which is called The Benefits of a Flexible Workforce. And so it's just literally out a few days ago. We've got a foreword in the book, an introduction from Michelle Rowan, who's the founder and president of the Work From Home Alliance. And she's actually going to be on the pod next week talking about work from home. So I took the opportunity to sort of call up Terry, not really just to sort of talk about the new book, but just to use that as a jumping off point to find out what's been going on in GigCX and how it's evolved over the last few years. So it would be great to maybe get your views as well on what you've seen happening, particularly over the last year, perhaps.
There's definitely a lot of interest in GigCX, and I've done work on this particular business model with a number of different organizations over the course of the past 12 to 18 months. Now, one of the things that I think is jumping out at me is that enterprises are very interested in seeing how they can leverage this business model. There's still a lot of confusion out there about what GigCX actually means or what it represents, but I'm seeing a lot more clarity. People are finding their feet in terms of identifying niches within their CX delivery points about how gig can be applied. The other thing that's pointing, I think, to more interest around GigMark is the BPO community itself. I speak with a lot of different operators in different parts of the world, of different sizes, different magnitudes, and GigCX is very much on the radar of companies or of BPOs where it probably wouldn't have been considered even 6 to 12 months ago. So to my mind, the pioneering work that companies like LiveXchange have done have really set the stage for gig to gain more prominence and more traction within the scope of both the captive operators as well as the outsourcers looking to leverage this business model.
Yeah, I think that what's really interesting is that when people first started talking about this, there was quite a famous Gartner report, a Gartner prediction from 2020 that said within the next 5 years, over 3/4 of all customer service will be gig-based. And I think that, it was a sort of a typical stake in the ground. We all know that Gartner likes to make these pronouncements, and very rarely do people sort of look back a few years later and say, well, that was completely wrong. I mean, it's very clear that gig is becoming an important tool for augmenting how customer service processes work, but we're not seeing a whole-scale takeover. We're not seeing the end of the BPO model. I think that what we're seeing is the creation of a much more flexible model, where we can have a traditional kind of 8-hour shift and people employed by a BPO, and they provide the daytime, Monday to Friday cover. But you can use the gig economy for those kind of middle of the night calls and weekend calls, the stuff that, the times that people don't want to work, so there is a way that you can augment the stuff that you're doing. And I think that, we covered this 2 years ago when we had Terry on the podcast, and that was actually a panel discussion, wasn't it? We had New Age, the retailer from Canada, and McKinsey as well. And when you sort of listen to a case study of a retailer like that always struggled every Black Friday, they were taking an hour to answer customer calls with their internal captive contact center. And as soon as they just kind of switched to any busy period, like the holidays, they just go to their gig workers. And it just makes sense. And you just think, well, why do we still have problems every Black Friday when we've known this for years?
Yeah, exactly. Well, look, I think the best way to answer a lot of these points and questions is to listen to Terry. He always has some amazing feedback and some incredible insights. So I'm looking forward to the interview, and let's go straight to it.
Hey, Terry, it's great to get you back on the podcast. Now, this is a bit of an unusual discussion because I called you up to talk about your new book, which is GigCX, The Benefits of a Flexible Workforce. But actually, this is a book that I worked on with you and Brian Pritchard as well. So, I could sit here talking about the book myself. But I think that a lot of the intellectual kind of inspiration for this subject came from you, and I was more kind of like grafting and doing a lot of the writing work. So this is the third book that we've done together, isn't it?
Yeah,
and
it is,
and we kicked off kind of explaining what is GigCX, and then we kind of looked at the evolution of GigCX. I mean, it was called Don't Fear the Gig Worker. So right. It really kind of looked at how the gig economy was blending with CX. So what would you say is the main message this time? Because it's called GigCX, The Benefits of a Flexible Workforce. So What are some of the key chapters or main messages that you're seeing coming out of this one?
Sure. First off, it's great to be part of the podcast again. I'm a big fan of yours, and you know that. And I would be remiss to not thank you personally and Michelle for your efforts and collaboration with this book. It's always awesome to work with you, and I'm very grateful and thankful for Michelle for her effort and contribution in the forward. I think that the title says it all, right? It's the benefits of a flexible workforce. The world has changed, and staffing people on an 8-hour shift with two 15-minute breaks and a 30-minute lunch. And for all of you that are FTE fans out there that are listening to the podcast, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Those days are done, and looking at efficiencies, looking at alternatives, not replacements, but to augment. This is what the book is all about.
So it seems, I guess, one of the key points then is we're taking that kind of experience of work from home from the pandemic, but we're kind of throwing in a lot more flexibility into the mix as well. And I think that, you quoted the chief executive of Fiverr before when we were talking about this, and I think he was saying people aren't just quitting jobs to get another similar job. They want new jobs that fit their lifestyle, and I think that it isn't that really what we're talking about here. It's actually work itself that's changing.
Absolutely, and another thing that, going back to him, another thing that he said that I thought was really intriguing is when companies are reducing staff for cost management, the work still needs to get done. Doesn't mean the work got any less. The work still needs to get done. So leveraging these types of alternative methods like GigCX, that's how we get work done in a much more efficient way, even because the work still needs to get done.
Yeah, and doesn't this also offer the opportunity to tap into completely new pools of labor as well?
Cool.
I mean, you've talked before when we've discussed this, especially about like people with disabilities that find it difficult to travel across the city to get to an office, or recently retired people who just want to do some work flexibly, but they don't want to be commuting to an office and doing an 8-hour shift.
That's exactly right. So you're tapping into an entirely different workforce that's highly skilled, highly stable, and you put them where you need them. And that's a huge benefit for companies today. Think about your speed to proficiency when you're bringing somebody in that's got maybe 20 years experience in a field, and they just don't want to work an 8 to 5 job or 9 to 5 job, and they want to work 4 or 5 hours a day. You put them where you need them. That's a huge benefit to you from a speed to proficiency, and obviously a cost to acquire perspective as well.
Yeah, so really what you're talking about is you're not bringing someone in because they've got a good customer service voice and then training them on the product they need to support. You're going out and saying, okay, we need banking professionals or tax professionals, so let's go out and get those people that already know the subject, and then we can bring them up to speed on the platform.
That's exactly right. So I think about the early days of work from home, where we were talking about just replacing where somebody worked from, but it was still the same old FTE model. I'm just going to do it from home this time. And now you look at where we're at and you say, I want a flexible workforce, but a highly knowledgeable workforce. And this gives you the opportunity to cast a global net, to be very selective for flexibility and skill sets. And so it works for the employer, and it also works for the individual.
Yeah, and I remember you writing a blog before about the IRS, because they're the percentage of calls they're actually answering is hopeless. Something like only 1 in 10 gets through, and it just seems like, why are those guys not kind of giving you a call and saying, how do we make this more flexible?
It's very true, and you know, if anyone from the IRS is out there listening to the podcast, please, I'd love to talk with you because we can help.
Yeah, well, because that's the point. We're talking about subject matter expertise, and so, you know, how many tax professionals are just sitting out there and only really busy for 2 or 3 months of the year?
That's right. That's right. I was looking at something just the other day. There are over 400 million gig workers in the world today, and you know that's gone up 41% since 2016. So that's not me. That's ABC News talking about this, right? So it proves your point that work has changed, and the people that are looking for those jobs, they want the jobs that fit into their lifestyle, not the other way around. And you know, we all talk about the, you know, living to work versus working to live. And I applaud this generation and the folks that are adopting the gig model, because that's really what they're talking about.
Yeah, yeah. And of course, when we're talking about customer service jobs, you know, most of the time the agent role isn't all that aspirational. You know, they're tough gigs, and it's often minimum wage. Do you think that, like what you're talking about, this emphasis on actually being a subject matter expert with flexible hours and working from home, I mean, does that move the dial completely on how people perceive the value of these jobs?
It does. And when you take the savings that you get from from not having to account for the employee costs, right? Whether that's vacation time or benefits, et cetera, whatever those are, you can put that back into the wage for these individuals. So no, nobody's making minimum wage or less in this model, at least, you know, from our perspective. And so you're making the job more lucrative for the individual, and you're helping them be very selective on the shifts that they want to work. You're giving them that flexibility, and you're also leveraging their talent and their experience and their knowledge, because they're in something that they want to do. So it's a win for everybody.
Yeah, yeah. And one of the main analysts that's often been quoted about the growth of GigCX is Gartner, who you know, a couple of years ago, they claimed that soon it would be about 3/4 of all customer interactions are gig based. But it doesn't seem to be developing as an either or. You know, we're not seeing the death of the traditional contact center, and we're not seeing GigCX take over completely. So you know, what is the situation?
It's a great point, and it's not an either or, it's an and. And you know, I'm just going to use one example: nights and weekends. Those are notoriously hard to staff shifts for any contact center that's out there. And you look at where GigCX can fit in. Well, start there and don't change anything else. Just incorporate it into your model and let it run its course. It's a great insurance policy for you. Interestingly enough, Forbes just put an article out this week talking about the top 10 business trends for 2024 that everyone must be ready for now. And in that list, number one was, or part of the list was about the customer experience revolution. And the second one was remote and distributed work and flexibility, right? So this is exactly what we're talking about here with this.
Yeah, yeah. It's a combination of all of them. Yeah.
Exactly.
I wanted to go back 2 years to the podcast we did with McKinsey, where we had a discussion with McKinsey talking about how GigCX is changing the CX model, and this applies both for BPOs and companies that manage customer service internally. And the point back then was that you shouldn't have to worry about things like Black Friday or other peak periods if you've got this kind of layer on top that you can call on when you need it. But what do you think? Because we still see chaos all the time with airlines and retailers, and every Black Friday it's impossible to get in touch with a retailer where you have a return problem. So how come we haven't evolved in the past couple of years?
Great. Boy, what a great question. And this opens up a whole nother discussion point because of the length of training that some of these companies require in the industries that you just mentioned. You're talking about 6 to 8 to 12 weeks of new hire training. And so it's a contradiction in and of itself. I need the flexible labor, but my new hire training curriculum is 12 weeks long. And it doesn't, the two don't mesh. And what you see is the end result of chaos when, God forbid, something happens with an airline that they don't have enough staff. Well, it's part of the entire process that people have to go to. The labor is there. And it's simply a matter of maybe doing some different call arrival patterns or looking at different lines of business that you could use a more flexible labor workforce. I don't know about you, but when I'm traveling and something happens to my flight, I want somebody to answer my call. I don't want to sit on hold. And I'm sure you're the exact same way. If I can't work it out on the app by myself, I just need somebody to pick up the phone and talk to me, right? And that helps to calm things down just in and of itself. Well, you don't need 12 weeks of training to do that.
Yeah. You can create a different layer, like a triage, basically. Yeah,
exactly right. And I think you see a similar thing on the open enrollment side, on the healthcare side, specifically in North America, where these are extended training length programs, and you need them. You need the people, but let's look at the curriculum and see if we can do some adjustment on the call types for this flexible labor to get them through the process sooner, so they can actually be more productive for you.
Yeah. And there must also have been a lot of people laid off from the travel industry during the pandemic. And, we saw last year loads of airlines and airports having trouble trying to ramp back up again to normal. Sure. Surely there's people out there that worked in travel and just moved off to do something else because of the pandemic,
Yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, just in conversation, you talk with people that were, pilots or gate agents or flight attendants or something like that, and they've stepped into different roles, and to be able to tap into that skill set, right, is a really amazing thing if you can make it interesting for them.
Yeah. Well, and that comes back to a point you made earlier about Gen Z sort of, demanding something different from their employer. Sure. I mean, certainly when you and I were getting our first professional jobs, you didn't sit there and tell your employer what hours you're going to work. It was just like you're in there Monday morning in the office.
That's exactly right. The only thing that I ever said was yes, ma'am, or yes, sir. That was it. And it's a different world that we live in today. And yeah, that generation is requiring, not requesting, they're demanding flexibility. And when you look at the cost to recruit, right, you're talking about, and I'm using again North America, $3,500 to $5,000 to recruit a new person. That's in the CX space, right? Well, that adds up at scale pretty quickly. But number two, if if you're artificially inflating your numbers because you're not offering that level of flexibility because your retention goes down, those are things that, those are absolutely in an employer's control today and should be respected and managed through. And I'm very grateful for that Gen Z and the stand that they're making, because it helps to bring validity to the whole flexible workforce model.
Yeah, we've been kind of focusing a lot on CX and GigCX, but I guess, what you're talking about applies across almost any professional that can deliver their work without physically being in an office location. So if I'm a graphic designer, if I'm a copywriter, any kind of professional skill that I can deliver remotely, I think that it would now be more interesting to have a variety of clients that I'm serving rather than one company I'm going to 40 hours a week.
That's exactly right. My oldest daughter is a perfect example of that. She travels the world and has several clients that she works with as a writer, and she works remotely, and the world is her office, and that's what a great opportunity that is for someone, right? And tapping into that skill set is very valuable for any company.
Yeah. So, okay, just to wrap up then, what's coming next for you? What do you see? Because we're heading now into the final quarter of the year. You must be looking forward to 2024. What's coming up?
So when I think about what we're working on as an organization, obviously continuing to scale our global reach. We're in 10 geos now, which is very exciting for us. We're going to continue to expand that global presence. So you've got a true global labor arbitrage capability with a flexible workforce. That's significant. You're going to see some additional changes and enhancements to our platform, looking at ways to compensate, looking at secure endpoints, making them universal for our clients, so you don't necessarily need to use just the customer care part of it. You can use our endpoints across the board for your organization, which is very helpful. These are a couple things that I see us working on, and again, just continuing to refine and scale the business, we're seeing a lot of traction, a lot of momentum taking place with this.
All right, excellent. Thanks very much, Terry. I'll make sure there's a link to the book in the show notes.
Mark, thanks again. Always a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to the CX Files podcast. We really appreciate your feedback and suggestions. You can reach myself, Mark Hillary, or Peter Ryan via LinkedIn. Please also leave a rating or review on your favorite podcast provider, as that helps more people to find us. As always, we'd like to thank Chris Haig at Traction Media for the CX Files graphics. See you next week.